The worst part wasn't finding out my fiancée had been sleeping with my best friend for 8 months. The worst part was that my parents already knew. And they didn't tell me. Let me back up. My name is Nolan. I'm 31 years old. I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in Calgary, and up until about 14 months ago, I thought I had the kind of life that made sense. Good job, good apartment, good people around me. I was wrong about at least 2 of those things. I met Isabel at a friend's birthday party in Kensington. She was a physiotherapist, quick-witted, laughed at things I actually found funny. And she had this way of paying attention when you talked. Like she was genuinely interested, not just waiting for her turn to speak. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I did it at Banff, by the lake, the way people do when they want a memory they can hold on to. She said yes. We were supposed to get married in September. My best friend since high school was a guy named Declan. We'd played hockey together since we were 12. He was supposed to be my best man. He'd been in the city for 3 years by then, working in construction project management. And when his lease ended in February, I told him he could stay with me for a couple months, while he figured out his next place. This is the part I've had to sit with for a long time. I invited him in. I handed him the keys myself. Isabel and I had talked about moving in together after the wedding. We were doing the responsible thing, the thing people tell you. It's smart. So she had her own apartment in Bridgeland, 20 minutes away. We spent most weekends together, weeknights when we could. She and Declan knew each other, obviously. She'd met him dozens of times. They got along fine, or what I thought was fine. Which apparently meant something different to both of them. I worked long hours. Forensic accounting is not a 9-to-5 job when you're in the middle of an audit. There were weeks I'd leave before 7 in the morning, and get home after 8 at night. I noticed that Declan was around less on those evenings. I thought he was just out. I didn't think much of it, because why would I? The thing that broke it open was stupid and small, the way those things usually are. I came home early on a Thursday in November. A settlement had been reached on a case, and we wrapped hours ahead of schedule. I stopped to get groceries at the co-op on the way home. I remember standing in line behind a woman buying 2 full carts of things, and I was almost annoyed about it. I got home at 5:15. I remember because I looked at my watch in the elevator. I heard music from inside my apartment before I even got the key in the door. Something I didn't recognize, something soft. I thought Declan had people over. I pushed the door open and the music was coming from my bedroom. I don't want to draw that moment out, because I've replayed it enough times in my own head, and I'm not interested in making it into something dramatic. I walked down the hallway. The bedroom door was half open. I pushed it the rest of the way. Isabel's car had been in my parking spot downstairs. I'd noticed it when I pulled in and thought she'd just stopped by. She had a key. I stood in the doorway for what felt like a long time. Neither of them saw me immediately. When they did, the room went very still. I remember Isabel saying my name. I remember Declan not saying anything at all. I put the grocery bags down on the floor of the hallway. I walked back out of the apartment. I sat in my truck in the parkade for about 40 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry yet. I felt the way you feel when you've just been in a car accident. This strange flat calm that is your brain, deciding which information to process first. Eventually I went back up. They were both dressed. Isabel was sitting on the couch with her hands in her lap, and Declan was standing near the kitchen counter, like he was thinking about leaving, but hadn't committed to it yet. I asked one question. I said, "How long?" Isabel looked at the floor. She said 8 months. 8 months. That was before I proposed. That was before Banff. That was before she said yes. I told Declan to get his things out of my apartment that night. I told Isabel to leave. Neither of them argued. Isabel tried to say something, and I told her I wasn't ready to hear it. Declan looked at me once on his way out, and I looked back at him and there was nothing either of us could say that would have meant anything. After they were gone, I sat in my kitchen until it was dark outside. The next day I called my parents. My dad picked up. I told him what had happened, just the facts, no drama. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "And I want to be precise here, because I've thought about this sentence many times since." He said, "Nolan, I have to be honest with you. We've known something was going on for a little while." I asked him what he meant. He said that my mother had seen Isabel and Declan together at the Chinook Mall in October. They were holding hands. My mother had told my dad. They'd decided together, apparently, that it wasn't their place to say anything, that they didn't want to cause problems before the wedding, that they hoped it would work itself out. They hoped it would work itself out. I asked my dad how it was supposed to work itself out, and he didn't have an answer for that. I drove over that evening. I wasn't calm by then. My mother met me at the door, and started explaining before I was even inside. She hadn't wanted to hurt me. She'd been worried about what it would do to me to find out. She'd been praying it would stop on its own. My dad sat in the living room and didn't say much. He looked uncomfortable. He kept saying he'd supported whatever my mom decided. I told them that by staying quiet they hadn't protected me. They'd protected the timeline. They'd protected the idea of a wedding. They'd let me walk around for 2 months not knowing that the woman I was engaged to and the man who was supposed to stand beside me at the altar were sleeping in together. They'd known. They had chosen, actively, not to tell me. My mother said she was sorry I felt that way. Not, I'm sorry we did that. Sorry I felt that way. I left. Over the following 2 weeks, other things surfaced. My cousin, who I've always been close to, and who has more nerve than most people I know, called me privately to tell me that she'd actually known as well. She'd heard it from her mother, who'd heard it from mine. She'd assumed someone else would tell me. She felt terrible and said so directly, and I appreciated that. But the picture it painted was that this had been something of an open secret in my family for a while. Multiple people knew. Nobody said a word. Declan had moved out and disappeared for a bit. Isabel texted me twice. The first time was an apology that read like she'd drafted it carefully and wanted credit for its thoughtfulness. I didn't respond. The second time she asked if we could talk, and I said not yet, and she didn't push it. I called off the vendors myself. The deposit on the venue was non-refundable. $3,800 gone. The catering company had a cancellation policy that allowed for partial recovery, if done more than 90 days out, which I managed by the skin of my teeth. The florist was understanding. The photographer was not. In total I lost somewhere around $6,000 in deposits and cancellation fees. Isabel offered to split it. I said, no, not out of generosity, but because I didn't want to be in a financial conversation with her that stretched over months. I got Isabel's key back. I asked for the engagement ring back, and she gave it without argument. That surprised me slightly. I had it appraised and then sold it to a jeweler on 17th Avenue. It had cost me $11,000 2 years ago. I got just under $7,000 for it. It felt like a reasonable trade. The apartment was mine. My name, my lease, my stuff. That was the one thing I hadn't done that the guy in every story like this apparently does. I hadn't let anyone else's name get attached to anything I owned. Small mercies. A few weeks after everything fell apart, I started hearing through my mother that Declan was struggling. He'd lost some friends over it. He was having a hard time with work. Apparently some professional thing had come up. I didn't know the details and I didn't ask. My mother relayed this to me with a tone that I can only describe as a gentle suggestion, that I might want to check in on him. I want to sit with that for a second. My mother was suggesting that I check in on the man who had been sleeping with my fiancée in my apartment for 8 months. I want to be fair to her and say that I think she genuinely believed she was being compassionate, but what she was actually doing was asking me to manage her discomfort with family conflict by being the bigger person. In a situation where I had not done a single wrong thing. I told her I wasn't going to do that. She said she hoped I would find it in my heart to eventually forgive him, that holding on to anger only hurt me. I told her I wasn't angry, I was just done. She didn't know what to do with that. The forgiveness conversation came up again at Christmas. I went because I wasn't ready to give up the holiday entirely, and because I have a younger sister who was not involved in any of this, and who I love and didn't want to punish. My dad's brother and his wife were there, my cousin, a few others. It was civil for most of the day. At some point after dinner, my mother brought up Declan in conversation, casually, like you'd mention a neighbor, and said she'd run into him and he seemed to be doing better. There was a silence. I said nothing. My uncle asked how I was holding up. I said fine, my mother said. And I'm reconstructing this as accurately as I can. I think it would mean a lot to Declan if Nolan could at least have a conversation with him. For the sake of the family. For the sake of the family. Declan is not family. He is my former best friend. He is not my blood, he doesn't come to Christmas. He has no claim on the phrase for the sake of the family. But in that room, at that moment he had more advocates than I did. I excused myself and called my sister out to the front porch. I told her I was leaving. She understood. She hugged me and said she was sorry she hadn't known. That she would have told me. I believe her. I drove home and I sat with things for a while. The following month, I transferred positions internally at my firm. There was an opening in the Vancouver office that I'd had my eye on for a while. Not because of any of this, just a role I'd wanted. It was a lateral move technically but with more visibility, and a client portfolio I was genuinely interested in. I put in for it, interviewed in January, got it in February. I told my parents I was moving. My mother cried. My dad asked if this was because of the situation. I said it was because of a job opportunity, which was true, and that the timing was what it was, which was also true. My mother asked if I was running away. I said I was moving towards something. She said she hoped I wasn't doing this to punish them. I didn't engage with that, because the only honest answer I had would have made things worse. Before I left, did one thing that I'd been thinking about for a while. I wrote an email. Not an angry email, not a venting email, not a letter designed to wound anyone. A factual email. I wrote, in plain language, what had happened. That Isabel and Declan had been in a relationship behind my back for 8 months, That multiple members of my family had known and said nothing, that I had found out by walking into my own bedroom. I wrote that I was not inviting responses, that I wasn't looking for an argument, and that I was sharing this because I believed that people who called themselves my family deserved to understand why I would be less present going forward. I sent it to my aunts and uncles and a handful of cousins who were close enough to be relevant. The replies came in over about 4 days. A few were supportive. One aunt in particular was both honest and kind in a way that I still appreciate. A few were uncomfortable and hedging. One uncle replied, asking me not to air private matters by email, which told me everything I needed to know about his priorities. My mother called me furious. She said I'd embarrassed the family. I told her that I hadn't made any choices that led to an 8-month affair. That the only embarrassing thing was what had been done, and what had been covered up, and that I hoped one day she could see the difference. I moved to Vancouver in March. I found a 1-bedroom in Mount Pleasant. A 15-minute bike ride from the office. Good coffee shop on the corner, where you can exist without having to explain yourself to anyone. The rain was an adjustment. I didn't mind it as much as I expected to. I threw myself into the new role. The client work was interesting in the way that I'd hoped. More complex. More moving parts. The kind of files you actually have to think about. I got into a routine. I ran the seawall in the mornings. I started cooking more, which was something I'd always meant to do. A colleague named Fiona introduced me to her hiking group and I started going on weekends. It was fine. It was more than fine eventually. About 6 months in, I got a message from Declan. He'd found my email somehow, probably not difficult, same address I'd had for 10 years. He wrote that he'd been doing a lot of thinking, and that he was sorry, that he knew sorry wasn't enough, that he hoped someday I'd be open to talking. I read it twice. I didn't respond. Not because I was still furious. I genuinely wasn't, not the way I'd been. But because there was nothing in me that wanted that conversation. The closing of a door is not always about anger. Sometimes it's just about knowing what you need and what you don't. Isabel and Declan are apparently together. I know this because my cousin mentioned it in passing, not maliciously, just the way you mention things. They've been together since the fall, living together in the city. I didn't feel much about this. Maybe that was the clearest sign that I'd actually moved on. My mother and I speak occasionally. It's polite. There's a gap between us that didn't used to be there, and I think we've both quietly accepted that it isn't closing anytime soon. My dad texts me sometimes. Sports scores, random links, the way dads do when they're not sure how to say the thing they actually want to say. I respond. I'm not cold with him. I just have less to offer than I used to. My sister guys came out to visit me in July. We spent 4 days hiking Garibaldi and eating our way through Granville Island, and not talking about any of it unless she brought something up, which she did, once, at dinner. She asked me if I was really okay. Not are you fine, but actually okay. I thought about it. I said yes, and I meant it. Which surprised me a little. The wedding would have been in September. I don't know if I expected to feel something on that date and didn't, or if I was just too busy. I had a site visit in Kelowna that week for a client file. I drove through the Okanagan in a rental car with the windows down and the radio on. It was a warm fall. The kind of September that makes you understand why people move to BC. I want to say something about trust, because I think people misunderstand what gets damaged in a situation like this. The affair hurt. It was a genuine wound and I'm not going to minimize it. But what I found hardest to recover from wasn't Isabel or even Declan. It was the discovery that the people who were supposed to see me clearly had, when it counted, looked away. My mother had stood at a mall and watched the woman I was going to marry holding another man's hand, and had gone home and made dinner, and not called me. That image stayed with me. Not with bitterness eventually. More with a kind of grief. You build your understanding of people over decades. And then you learn something new, and you have to rebuild from there. I don't think my parents are bad people. I think they made a decision based on their own discomfort. And dressed it up as protection for me, and that when I refused to let that framing stand, they didn't know how to handle it. I think a lot of families work this way. Conflict gets managed around the edges. Things get absorbed until someone stops absorbing, and then that person becomes the problem. I became the problem when I stopped being willing to be managed. I'm alright with that. I'm 32 now. I live in a city I've come to genuinely like. I'm good at my job. I ran a half marathon in the spring. First one I'd ever done. Finished in under 2 hours, which I'm unreasonably proud of. I have a small group of people here that I trust, and I've learned to be more deliberate about what that word means. I'm not looking for applause or for anyone to tell me I made the right calls. Some of the calls were messy. I could have handled certain conversations better. But I did not cheat on anyone. I did not lie to anyone. And I did not ask anyone to carry a secret that wasn't theirs to carry. What I want, the thing I've landed on after all of it, is just a life that belongs to me. Where the people in it chose to be there for actual reasons. Not because of Christmas dinners or last eye names. Or an idea of how families are supposed to work. That's not a dramatic conclusion. It's just the thing I keep coming back to when I sit with all of it. It's enough.